Thanks a lot, Henry. And just want to say congratulations to Scott and the LSI team. Another very well-run event. So congrats, well done. And we're going to toast several times, so we'll save a little in reserve here. Okay, so this is going to be a lot of fun. As Henry alluded to, we were looking for creative ways to find intersections between tech, invention, med tech, and I thought, who better to do that with than the two of you? I see that you're not waiting for me to ask you to describe the wine. You're just diving in, which is good. That's appropriate. That's right. That's right. So I did discover that we have many things in common, coming from you and I both working for Bill Gates at very different times in the journey. Cam, your crew of 8 people at your software engineering firm in 1985-86 was acquired into Microsoft.
That's right.
We would love to tell some stories, Josh, also about invention, med tech development, and your connection to wine as well. Maybe, Cam, you could start us off with what are we drinking and how did this come into being and where's it from in the world?
Okay, I'll start with the white wine. This is our flagship white wine. It is called Latamique, and it's called Latamique, which I think is not really a French word, because it looks directly at Hanford, which is the Superfund site that, of course, is where they enriched the plutonium for the bombs that ended in World War II. So this is a blend of 5 different white Rhone varieties: Viognier, Roussanne, Marsanne, Claret, and Grenache Blanc. And they're all co-fermented. So rather than vinifying the grapes separately and then blending later, we kind of, okay, we're going to throw it all in the same vat. There's no subtracting the wines once you do that. And it's called co-fermentation. We love it because I think it really integrates the flavors. And I think it's a beautiful nose on the wine. You'll see it's slightly cloudy because we do not filter it or fine it. And in fact, we make it like a red wine. So it remains on the skins through fermentation. So this got about 3.5 weeks of skin contact versus a traditional white wine these days, which is 0 days of skin contact. It gives some more richness, it gives some more structure. This is a wine that will age, and we like it very much, and it's pretty unique.
I think thank you for that. I think there's an interesting corollary with venture and trying to find sort of white spaces in the market to develop products there. But also the selection of that particular plot of land on Red Mountain in eastern Washington. Could you say a little bit about why you went there?
Yes, I bought the property in 2004, and I bought it without electricity, without water rights, and without legal access to the property. Other than that, it was awesome. But over time, we solved those, and the most critical piece of the puzzle was water rights. We solved that. We planted the vineyard in 2016. We had our first harvest in 2018. And we still are mainly a vineyard, so we sell most of our grapes, but we do hold some back for our own fledgling wine project, and that's what you're tasting here today.
And I can say, knowing some winemakers, I don't have quite the network you do in the space. We've got some mutual friends, like Travis Allen from Kobayashi. If you get a chance to have Kobayashi wine at any point, I think very soon you're going to hear quite a bit about a lot of his labels. He's quite an innovative guy and winemaker, and his journey actually is parallel to ours in founding Proprio. About 8-9 years ago is when Travis was considering starting a wine label, and he actually has quite a bit of connection to the medtech space. He works with my co-founder, who's a pediatric brain surgeon at Seattle Children's. They are literally in the OR together, so there's more dimensions to the intersection between winemaking and brain surgery than you might have thought. So there's the segue for you, Josh. How the heck did you get into the wine space and invention, and what's Coravin, and tell us that story.
Well, so Stanford Biodesign. But first of all, I want to thank everybody who's here. You guys are the diehards. I cannot believe how many people are here. I thought we would just be by ourselves, honestly.
Which wouldn't have been that bad. We've got good grape juice.
Or maybe you thought they were going to be passing out wine and you're disappointed right now. I don't know. But no, thanks. I see a lot of friends. Way back going into the late 80s, I started experimenting with the methodology for innovation. And that ultimately became the Stanford Biodesign process. But back then, we were doing it inside of Pfizer, which had a medical device business, a $2 billion medical device business back then. That's how old that is. And one of the guys that I hired to come work with me is a really creative guy called Greg Lambrecht. So Greg, was actually my really only full-time hire into what we called the Strategic Innovation Group. And we were executing on serially the biodesign process, but back then we called it Fresh Tech with a PF for Pfizer.
Nice.
Yeah. I should be in marketing. I missed my calling.
It's really too bad that name went away.
And anyway, we've been friends our entire careers, but worked together there. And a few years later, Greg shows up and he's got an empty bottle. And he says, I've been drinking out of this empty bottle for the last, year, and every glass has been great. And he's like, how did I,
Has he lost his mind? Is what
and I'm
you're
like,
wondering?
I'm looking for the hole, I'm looking around. And he said, he applied the process that we created to wine. And his wife was pregnant, and he wanted to have good wine, but his wife was going to share it with him. So he didn't want to ruin the bottle. So he went through and experimented with all the existing preservation modalities. Mm-hmm. None of them work, as you all know. They really don't. I mean, if anything, you get a few days out. The need statement, so to speak, was, a way to remove a glass of wine without exposing the wine that's in the bottle to air. Mm-hmm. And if we were doing it in proper methodology, there's supposed to be a population. This is thirsty people, is the population, as who we were trying to address. And he experimented with a couple of different gases, and had figured out that argon, if you put the argon in, it can push the wine out. And after a few explosions, realized it needed to be regulated. Mm-hmm. Anyway, he gave me one as a present, and it changed my life. I'm a wine lover, but I totally changed how I buy. Like, 'cause I used to buy wine that I would intend to throw out because I was going to just have a glass or two, and then we'd drink. You throw out the remainder. That meant that you had the wine that you drink during the week that you're going to ready to throw out, which wasn't that great, and then maybe the one on the weekend that you'd be like, okay, we'll finish the bottle. But it changed it. So I suddenly realized I'm not buying any of those wines that I don't intend to drink every drop from. And I started to realize, oh my God, we got to make this as a product.
It changed behaviors.
Yeah. So I said, Greg, this is a great toy, but man, we got to make a company out of this. Mm-hmm. And so we teamed up and started Coravin, and went, we worked with IDEO to take the contraption that he had come up with in his basement and turn it into a consumer product. And it's been a really mostly fun ride.
It's a good summary for most ventures.
Mostly fun.
Right.
Every I know we're going to talk about this, but the analogs to starting a winery is very much like any startup. You have these dreams, and everyone's excited in the beginning, and then reality sets in, and your goal is to make people happy or improve their quality of life, and that's what you're really shooting for in the end. But, along the way, there's lots of challenges. Mm-hmm. But, in the end, hopefully you're a success if you can look back and say you did something good, and people's lives are better. So
that's right.
There's a lot of analogies.
What do they say, Cam? A good way to end up with $1 million is to start with 10 and found a winery, right?
Exactly.
You can probably speak exactly
that
to
is
that.
what they say.
That's
yes,
right.
That's
Except in medtech, it's always up. Right? It's always up and to the right.
Yes, that's right.
Okay, Cam, should we move to the second wine and another story? What do you think?
You bet. Okay. So the second wine is a Grenache, which is the primary variety of Châteauneuf-du-Pape in France. It is little planted in the U.S. Of red grape vines in Washington State. It's less than 1%. Yet it was 40% of our initial plantings because we made a big bet on Grenache. Grenache likes heat. Grenache likes wind. We're at the top of a mountain. It's windier than all get out. But the Grenache has done super well. And so that's the second wine.
There you go. Cheers. Cheers.
Cheers.
Here's to that. Sounds like being in a med tech company on the top of a mountain with all the wind coming at you and rain. It's very similar.
So we'll come back to that in a second. So Cam, is there any early days Microsoft story that is safe to share here, knowing that you could save some of these stories that might better not be recorded and played elsewhere for maybe dinner after this?
It's been a long time.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, sure. You know, I dropped out of college. My brother dropped out of graduate school, or postdoc, actually. And we started a software company in Berkeley, California, and in 1984. And Microsoft bought the company in 1986. You know, we were entirely bootstrapped. I was 23 years old. He was 25 years old. You know, we'd have to have this joke. We'd go to meet with venture capitalists and say, well, how much management experience do you have? And we'd say, well, let's see, what time is it? Which was true, but didn't go over entirely.
So you didn't
well.
raise any money? Is that what
So-
you're saying?
No,
It was entirely
well,
bootstrapped?
we ate a lot of hot dogs, a lot of top ramen. We all lived in a single house, which my ex-boss owned and let us use. And then, you know, going to Microsoft, where we were, you know, I was approximately employee 1,500. That to me was like, oh my God, huge company. We'll be able to kick back here for a few years, and then we'll go start another company when, you know, we're relaxed. And of course, what we discovered was the culture of the company was identical to our startup. It was super intense. They gave people, you know, lots of leeway. You know, you want to jump in the deep end, God bless you. I don't know if there's always the support if you couldn't make that, but it was an incredible ride. It was great.
Was this the era when supposedly Bill was checking license plates in the parking lot? See who
That would
was
be more of a
working late?
Steve Ballmer thing to do.
Ah, okay.
No, and there used to be a dinner every month at Bill Gates' house for new hires. And back then you could actually do that. And Steve Ballmer would walk in and he would look at whose name tag was not taken.
So if you didn't show up, you might as well not show up the next day at work.
Well, I don't think it was that harsh, but I'm sure he noticed. Right?
Is this when Bill was doing the jumping over the chairs thing that we've all seen on the internet?
Jumping out of the trash can, I think it is. I never actually saw that, so presumably that did actually happen.
Okay. So Josh,
Yes.
I'm sure you have some early stage venture crazy stories that are both safe for recording and not safe for recording. So save some for dinner. What can you share about, as you said, the top of the mountain, the windy, you know, peak, and the peaks and valleys of
sure.
founding and growing these companies?
I would say every company, perhaps multiple times over their existence, goes through existential crises. Moments where the future is very uncertain and you have to figure out how to get out of the hole that you have found yourself in.
I'm having
for one
flashbacks
reason
as
or
you
another.
bring this up, yeah.
Yes, exactly. I mean, there are so many, it's hard to pick one. I wish there was less. Let's see. I mean, you know, we could go down many paths. I think one story that, you know, hasn't been told that broadly is, you know, how we navigated reimbursement for Acclarent, where we basically had the professional society and some of the leaders really not in favor of our technology, and many of the community doctors and most of the, you know, sort of everyday ENT practitioners were in favor because it allowed them to do something that they had never been able to do before, which is treat part of the anatomy that's usually exceptionally difficult and dangerous, actually quite easily and fast, and with even, I would say, better results than you could do with traditional instrumentation, which really flip-flopped the power you know, sort of angle. So if you were in an academic institution and your pride and joy was this very difficult procedure on the frontal sinuses, and everyone can do it now, actually faster, easier, and maybe even better, then that really changes the game. And those are also the most lucrative. So it was an interesting battle. It played itself out over many years, and some of it publicly. But in the end, patients won, and doctors overall won, because at that time enough doctors had been exposed to the technology and were using it. They recognized the power of it, and really sort of essentially forced the academy to get behind it. But it was quite unusual, and we were lucky. We had some very good and strong partners who stood up for the technology against tremendous political threats and pressure, and that's why it's still available for patients today. But it was wild. It was a wild process, and many moments where we thought we were just actually going to get destroyed. But we, thankfully, with the help of the community and lots of good leadership at the company, got there. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that. Kim, I didn't prepare with you for this question, so sorry. But I don't actually know how you became a VC. I know about Ignition Partners, and you had about a 20-year run there, invested in a lot of companies and founders that I know in the Pacific Northwest.
Right. Well, so I had been at Microsoft for 13 years, did a lot, primarily in the sales and marketing of our operating systems. It was time for me to go. And so I left, a number of folks left at the same time. No forcing function there, but I thought it was more interesting to try something on the outside, and we decided to try our hand at early stage investing. So earlier it had on the slide that I'm with Revival Healthcare. I'm sure it's a fine firm. I don't know who they are. I was with Ignition Partners and helped found Ignition Partners, and they're an IT firm. So information technology specialists in enterprise software. And so got into that, and look, it's a great job. It is super interesting. It's very intellectually stimulating. It keeps you current a lot of things. And it's also kind of agonizing because it takes you so long to understand whether you made the right decisions, right? That can take, upwards of a decade. So that's a little frustrating part of it, but it is a great job. I think it's a pretty crowded job these days. I don't know specifically about healthcare, but certainly in the IT side.
So you ended up effectively leading third-party developer engagement for Microsoft platform.
Yeah.
So I thought you were going to say that maybe when the Steve Ballmer developers video came out, that's when you decided to leave and become a VC.
Okay, so one quick story there. When he did all of that, he punched himself in the face so hard he had a shiner the next day.
Wow.
And he walked up to the stage. He goes, "Yeah, if I have a black eye tomorrow, no one did that to me. I just did it to myself, dancing around on the stage."
If you want to be entertained, don't do it right now, but maybe after this, just Google Steve Ballmer developers video.
Entertained / horrified.
There you go. Yeah. Well, you have the distinction of having worked with Paul Allen, Bill Gates, Steve Ballmer for quite a long time. Any lessons that you can share here? I mean, understanding that you didn't found Microsoft, but you joined them at an early stage and saw them through 15 years of tremendous growth.
Yeah, absolutely.
Any lessons you can share with the founders and investors here?
Well, so a couple things we used to say. Focus wins. I don't know how focused the company was when I left, but certainly when I got there initially, they were very focused, and that paid off. And also the whole job of a startup is to be more nimble, closer to the customer, smarter, faster than the incumbents. And if you can't do that, then obviously you don't really have a place being in a startup, and your startup probably isn't going to be successful. So embrace those. Take advantage of it. Change is your friend. The more you have a view of the world different from other people's, that can be a gigantic advantage.
It actually dovetails with what you and I discovered right before we came in here, which is that we met 5 or 6 years ago at CES when, speaking of focus, Proprio was a laptop and a Oculus Dev Kit 2 headset.
Yeah.
that didn't work very well, as you thankfully reminded me. I appreciate that, Josh. Um, Thankfully, artificial intelligence, AR, VR has gotten a lot better, as has the Proprio paradigm system. Could you talk a little bit about maybe pivots or focus, just tapping into that theme a little bit more, any product decisions? One of my favorite interview questions for new hires, including Kabir Gulati, our new head of data at Proprio, was what's the hardest product decision you've ever had to make?
Yeah.
Whether that's killing something that you were really in love with, a feature that customers, the feedback was tremendous, we need this,
Right.
but maybe it just wasn't exactly the right thing, or you weren't going to be able to get it there
Right.
because of resources or timing or whatever it might be, or
Yeah.
technical difficulty in execution, whatever it might
Right. Well, in the framework that we teach at Stanford Biodesign, you got this thing called a need spec and criteria that you're always trying to iterate to, and that's the idealized view of what you're really trying to achieve for patients, right? And along the way, you have your ideas, and they seem to fit, but then you actually do experiments, and then you actually have to build things and then go test them, and you learn whether you have what you thought you had. And I would say, and I'll use it, a successful story as an example. Neotract, we went and did first in human, and it seemed like it was going to work, but that was a crude version. And then we actually spent 2 years building a product that we thought we were going to take to market. And we went to the, again, first in human experience, and it did not work well. It was big, clunky, unreliable. It was also too expensive. And, we had just put 2 years into this thing, and we stepped back from this. This is not going to fly, and we have to start over. And you can imagine how the board and the investors were thrilled about that.
be. Yeah, who got to break that news? Is that you?
That was probably me.
Oof.
Actually, it was me and my co-founder Ted Lamson, and we basically said, this is not ready for prime time. We need to do it over. And here's why, and here's what we learned. Now we understand these criteria better, and we did. We actually restarted. We developed a whole new product, and
How long did that take?
it was 2 years.
Wow.
I mean, to get it back to, with all the testing and everything, get it back. But that next product was the product that never changed, all the way from nothing to our, sale to Teleflex for over $1 billion. But that was a tough decision to make.
Yeah.
But it was the right one, obviously. And literally, as we navigated many years of FDA and all that kind of stuff, making that tough decision then was the right thing to do, because otherwise we would have been stuck with that early version, and we would have been kicking ourselves the whole time.
Yeah.
So anyway, it's important to be real with yourself and tell yourself the truth all along the way. And if you don't have the right thing, then go fix it. Because otherwise you're going to just live with this thing, and it's really not going to be fun. So
And make that difficult decision as early as you can.
Yeah, exactly. Do it when you see it. Yeah.
That's good guidance for everybody in the room. Cam, you and I talked about how the heck do you start a winery, and the sort of corollaries with starting a company in terms of talent. Where does one go to, and how do you attract the right key people to start making wine, growing grapes and making wine?
Yeah, so I'd lived in Washington for a long time, collected wine. The Washington wine industry is about the 10th the size of the California wine industry. So it is possible to sort of get your arms around that and to know folks. And so I started by recruiting the best vineyard manager, that I knew. Our whole philosophy is wine's made in the vineyard. So if the fruit is not unique and differentiated, then what comes out of the bottle probably isn't going to be either. So we put a big focus on farming. And so my partner and vineyard manager is, I think, the best vineyard manager in the state. And then together we found a guy who I think is one of the more talented young winemakers in the state. He actually trained at Bryant Family in Napa, which is a very prestigious winery, and he's been up in Washington for probably 15 years now. No less, 10 years. but making great wines. And he made all of these. And the experiment of L'Atomique to say, okay, why in the world would you co-ferment 5 different white varieties? That was him and our vineyard manager collaborating and saying, hey, let's try it. And I was all for it, and very pleased with the results.
So those of you who don't know Bryant, the joke in the wine industry about Bryant is the juice is worth so much that they have interns holding buckets under each of the vats and the casks to catch every single drop, because that's like a $400 drop. And then they find a way to get that in the bottle.
It is $700 on release.
That's right.
Yes,
That's
a
right.
bottle.
It's like Screaming Eagle. So I think that's super interesting. How does one attract that kind of talent? Like, there's the identification of a great vineyard manager. and
So
winemaker.
the same reason they work in the wine industry. They're excited by this, and they come and they see the site. It's like, wow, nobody's ever grown grapes up here. We hired a guy from Paso Robles to consult with us, and he came up and he looked at the site and he goes, why in the world has no one ever planted grapes here before? But it's the attitude of the people, right next door to me was, going higher in elevation, going to the north slope. That was all nonsense. Nothing would come of that.
Yeah.
But I think we're showing that there can be very good things that come of that.
Yeah, I mean, the juice is really good, so you're doing something right for sure.
Thank you.
Could you talk a little bit about, prior to the reputation being established, right? Like, now you could go recruit talent if you have an idea and pull in NEA, Sophie Nova, all those partnerships you've done lots of things for and with those folks. How do you recruit top talent earlier in that sequence, right? Before that whole track record is established?
Yeah. I think you need to have an idea that is compelling enough, that draws people forward. And, sort of a mission, a vision for something that's so exciting that it actually, brings your team together. One of my very first projects was an absolutely impossible project. It was called transvascular. And our vision was to do coronary bypass grafting completely percutaneously with catheters. So on an awake patient, with catheters that you'd introduce through the femoral artery and vein, do the whole thing. And it was an audaciously crazy idea, but people came out for it. Like, it was like, this is ridiculous, but I have to do it. Like, sort of one of those type of things. So I think that's part of it, is to have something that really is just so compelling that it's like, wow, this actually, if this could work, this would be amazing. And honestly, as I look back at the folks that we pulled together, they've all gone off, and many of them I continue to work with actually in various other projects, but they've all gone off to do really cool things, So it was a good group of folks that came together, even though we had to pivot, and we actually wound up not doing that. We saved the company and pivoted to something a little bit more doable. But all those technologies that we were developing, were super cool, and it was an amazing experience. And I even, there's definitely things I would try to do better next time, but I don't regret trying to do something that was that exciting.
This is totally on the fly, I did not prep you for this, but what's the craziest, most creative, hopefully most effective recruiting effort? You just went after somebody who was awesome and you got them, or did something creative or interesting to get a great team together, or something like that?
Well,
like maybe send them a huge bottle of champagne or something like that?
No, I mean, I think the whole, look, there was a whole wave where, and I guess, I'm sure there's many stealth companies in the room, this works, like, it's a secret only you can know, but and this is back, I think inspired by, some people have taken it to extremes, and not in a good way, and I won't mention any names, but there was a thing like, keeping the element of surprise is also sort of like, like the screening process too. And I think the funniest one, which now that you've reminded me, when I was recruiting Bill Facto to McLaren, and because so we were like 3 or 4 interviews in before we were going to tell him what it is, and he was in the cardiovascular business, but a very relevant background. And, we had all sorts, he met all the board members, we had various people, John Chang, my co-founder, interviewed him. And so it's finally, like we get to the moment of truth, it's okay, you've passed all the screens, now we'll share with you what a Clarent is. And this is the business that's in balloon sinuplasty for chronic sinusitis. And, start the presentation, it's a picture of a nose, and he goes, wait, what? A nose? What is this all about? And he was so disappointed. I mean, it was like, I was like, wait, I would not have done all this if this was for like the nose. It's like, just bear with me, Bill. I'm going to tell you the story. Just like, and of course he wound up joining, and it was a success. But anyway, we used to go way into the interview process and do all this other stuff before we'd actually tell people what it was about, just to keep it secret. Because if we decided not to proceed, we didn't want people knowing, what we were doing.
This is an entirely unplanned moment, but right now we're going to do the first nose.
Oh, yes. There we go.
Did not do that intentionally, but it worked out. So what are we having, Cam? What's the third
Okay,
wine?
so the last wine is our Bordeaux blend. It is a third Cabernet Sauvignon, a third Merlot, and a third Cab Franc. And this wine is not released. It won't be released until October.
So a third Cab Franc is a lot of Cab Franc, when oftentimes you're at 10, 12%
It
in these
is.
kind of wines.
I personally, so first of all, I went back and I tasted pretty exhaustively all of the great wines that were made from Red Mountain in the past. And there's a lot of commonality. I loved wines with some Merlot and Cab Franc in them.
Sounds like a really just arduous product development, market research process. I feel
Lots
for
of
you.
late nights. And also, of course, I love the Bordeaux wines of Saint-Emilion, and so we want to try and do something like that. This is our first attempt. We've got another one that we're starting to blend for 2022 vintage. This is 2021. And that's down to 10% Cabernet Sauvignon. I don't know that we'll ever completely eliminate Cabernet Sauvignon because I don't want to be prescriptive about it. It's always about creating the best possible wine. But I think we can create a pretty interesting wine, long-lived wine in that style.
I think it's really important and you alluded to it earlier with respect to Grenache. From a volume perspective, I'm sure you know the ballpark numbers, but Washington State heavily indexes on Cabernet Merlot, as does California. Now it's a little more diverse down here. Do you have any sense of how much Bordeaux blend those grapes by volume are for Washington State? It's got to be
No,
really
I think
high.
Cabernet is probably number one.
Yeah.
I think Syrah would be number two.
Yeah.
And I think Merlot would be third after that. People don't realize it, but if you look at actual plantings in Bordeaux, Bordeaux is 50% Merlot. It's 25% Cab Sauv, about 25%.
I didn't realize it was that high.
Yeah, it's quite high.
And this is definitely a leading question, but what would you say is the single grape that is the most expressive of the land, the terroir in Washington State? The correct answer is Syrah.
Well, I would probably say the Grenache and the Syrah. Yeah. There's also a second cousin to those wines called Myhrvold. That's the wine that sells out the fastest. That's the wine that typically gets the highest score for us. We don't make a lot of it, but that's a fantastic grape for Washington State. When we planted it, there were fewer than 9 acres planted in the state.
Wow.
I'm sure there's more now, and that deserves to be, number 3 or 4.
Definitely an underappreciated varietal in the U.S. for sure.
Yeah.
Josh, is there, and again, I didn't prep you for this at all, but we're sufficiently in vino veritas, so we're telling truths here. What was the wine or one or two wines that just told you, shit, I love this stuff, I've got to get closer to understanding wine and how it's made and what I
Yeah.
like about it.
Right. It was absolutely Angelo Gaia's, wine in general, but I think it was a Barbaresco, and this is early in my career, before I could afford any of that wine, but I was fortunate to be working for Pfizer, and my boss, who loved food and wine, and this is back in the day when the travel and expense budget was quite rich. And
I thought you were going to say one of your VCs took you out for the
No.
VCs in the room. That's
I
a
mean,
great way to take care of your
I,
founders.
I did not. My parents were both, teachers. We'd get to the end of the summer and they'd be like shaking. We'd be like, "What money do we have for like pizza?" And we'd macaroni and cheese pizza. Things that could be reheated. And so, working for Pfizer, and it was a whole new experience. I mean, the best hotel I had stayed in at that point, before that, was like a Howard Johnson's. And so it was a whole thing, but I got exposed to this wine over dinner, and I just was like, it was like the angels sang, it's like, oh, it's like, oh my God, I loved it. And I actually was like, where do I buy it? I'd never seen it before. So I, called my local distributor. Actually, I think I wrote a letter to Angelo Gaia. No, that's what I did. I wrote a letter to him. Yeah, I did. And I was like, where do I buy your wine? He probably felt sorry for me. And he pointed me to the local, a local.
He responded to your letter.
He did.
Wow.
He did, actually. Later on in life, obviously with Corvin, I went and we did our early testing with Angelo and also Roberto Conterno and a couple in the Piemonte region. It was great to sort of reconnect, But anyway, he pointed me to a local distributor, and I bought my first bottle of Gaia, saved up for it. And at that point, I was working for Pfizer, so I could afford to buy a bottle, but
This is Gaia,
not more than one.
Gaja.
Gaja, right. Yeah,
I only know that because I've been fortunate to stumble into 2 bottles that I'm afraid to open.
Yeah.
For that same reason.
Corvin. Corvin is your solution.
That was also an unplanned
You can drink
plug.
it now, just a glass, and then leave the rest for later.
Well, I'm happy that now Josh has offered to the entire audience a friend and family discount on Corv. Is that what you just said? That's what I heard. 20% off.
All right. All right. Only for this audience, I'm going to give you the VIP code. Okay, this is just for the special people who have stuck around to the very last. Okay, write this down. When you go on the Corvin site, you will get a 20% discount with the following code. Are you ready? VIP capitals 2024, all one word. There's your 20% discount and all Corvin stuff for you. Thank you for sticking around.
Believe it or not, we did not plan that. I don't know
But
if
I
it's
thank
true.
you.
But
Brought
you
to you
can try
by
right now
a
on your
special promotional announcement by Corvin. Thank you very much.
Kim, was there a transformative wine for you? You got to top that story.
Corvin.com.
Yeah, I had a girlfriend in college who liked wine, and I went to buy a wine for her birthday, and I got this big spiel from the wine guy, and he said, like, this Cabernet, it tastes like nuts. I'm like, nuts? It's made out of grape juice, dude. How could it possibly taste like nuts? So I bought it, $7. Drank it that night, and oh my God, it tasted like nuts. And I was like, what is this stuff? How can that be? And that started me down the path.
What was that? I didn't catch it.
It was a Preston Vineyard Cabernet Sauvignon from the Alexander Valley. The winery is no longer there. But it was best $7 cab I ever had.
I'm going to reference a winemaker that you know, I'm sure, Christophe Baron from Washington State. Obviously, I'm showing my bias here. Christophe Baron, B-A-R-O-N, who comes from a winemaking family from France, started making these just wild Syrah down by the border of Washington and Oregon. The only word I can think of is, is vegetal or limestone. And I know this
Or
sounds,
just funk
Yeah,
is the
funk.
general term for it. No, and sure, and you get I got a friend who describes them as feral wines.
Yeah.
And that's pretty good. I tend to like that. I like the Syrahs from Cornas and Hermitage that have that, and Christoph's wines have that in spades.
Yes. Such that, I would say it's kind of inspired a district called the Rocks District in Washington State, where there are a number of different folks who have made wine with Christoph and gone out into this sort of diaspora. And Delmas is one that comes to mind, the Alexanders, force majeure, which for a lot of us in venture means a different contractual language, but force of nature, right? And some of these wines are truly forces of nature, and they just unfold in the glass as you're experiencing them over the course of an hour or two, can completely change.
I actually think the Rocks District of Milton Freewater, it's actually in Oregon. The Walla Walla region is mainly in Washington, but it does dip down into Oregon, is one of the best examples of terroir. It really is, because you can absolutely pick wines out from that region because of that funk.
That's actually a great segue. Could you explain how that area, inclusive of going up to Red Mountain and Horseheaven Hills and that area, geologically, this is a fascinating story, geologically formed?
Yeah, so that area was a puzzle for a long time, and geologists couldn't figure it out. And then they discovered it was formed by a series of huge floods during the last ice age. So as the glaciers retreated, there was actually a lake called Lake Missoula, and it covered most of Montana, Wyoming, and parts of Idaho. And it was held up by an ice dam, and they believed that as the glaciers retreated and things got warmer, that ice dam would fail, and you would get this gigantic flood. And that flood, and it happened many times, actually carved out the Columbia River Basin. So our site is about 10 miles north of the Columbia River, and Red Mountain is just high enough to be above the level of the flood. So like a rock in a river, you get these back eddies on the downward side of it, and that is what's deposited the soils where people grow wine. The cool thing about our property is, it starts in that very deep, silty soil, but it also extends up to the top that was never inundated in the flood, and it's all broken basalt. So from a geologic perspective, it's very interesting, and we were one of the first to grow grapes above the level of the flood on Red Mountain, and also the north side. And it's a hot site, so being on the north side, you're out of the sun a little bit earlier each day, and that's a real advantage.
And not that it's a competition, but everything's a competition. So compared to our friends down here in California, does Eastern Washington have more, the less, or the same in terms of the length of a growing day during the growing season of grapes?
No, the growing day is an hour and a half longer.
Thank you for delivering on that message. So Washington State, better than California. You heard it here first. That's data.
So at least
That's
where we
data.
are, it's a desert, so you get things to cool off at night, which helps the diurnal change, allows you to preserve your acidity. One of the hallmarks of our wines, and I think most Washington wines, is great acidity, which you really need if you want that freshness and if you want it to go well with food. But yes, we do have a very long day during the summer.
So
In
thank
fact,
you for delivering on
the
that. I
hottest
appreciate that.
period of the hottest hour of the day in the vineyard is typically 6 p.m.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
So you've painted a beautiful picture of winemaking. I think we've done we found the intersection of venture, tech, med tech. We've told stories of near-death experiences. Thank you, Josh. Just in closing here, let's take a look at the future. So future of winemaking, any thoughts? And then let's talk med tech, just to close things out. Where are things going?
Sure. So I would say that each year, wine, generally speaking, gets better and better. So that is a great thing for the consumer. A lot of people are very concerned about global warming, climate change in general. I don't really share that, because if you look at grapes today and you look at great Syrah that is grown in San Luis Obispo, and grape Syrah that is grown a stone's throw from the Canadian border, that's a huge variation. And the difference, of course, is, you know, the clones that are planted might be different, the viticulture might be different, when you pick might be different, how exactly you make the wine might be different, but wine can handle a far larger range of climate and does today than people imagine. So I think that, you know, will they be making great Cabernet and Napa in 2050? Yeah, I think they will. Now, it may not be identical to how they make it, grow it and make it today, but they'll be able to do that because the grape is fundamentally a super adaptable plant.
And the winemakers and the viticulturists are,
They will figure it out.
entrepreneurial and adaptable
You bet.
themselves. Yep.
You bet.
That's a cool message. Josh, what's the future look like in medtech and invention in that area?
Well, the future is here.
Yeah.
Thank you, Scott Pentel. I really want to. I think we should give him a round of
do a round of
applause.
applause.
Seriously. I will say I've been impressed by this meeting. I had the great opportunity to attend Barcelona as well, and I'm incredibly excited. I mean, you have catalyzed the community and created a venue for that communication, and I'm amazed. I mean, it's really the strategics, the venture groups, the entrepreneurs, the innovators. Well done. This is what it's about, and it's about community and coming together. So when I come to a meeting like this, I am incredibly optimistic about our future, and you know, I really mean it. So thank you, Scott. Thanks LSI, and you know, thanks for having me.
What a better way to close. Cheers.
Here's to you.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys. Thank you very much.